The eviction notice wasn't taped to my door like in the movies. It was folded, creased, and shoved through the slot so hard it skidded across the linoleum like a paper blade. I remember the sound, a dry hiss, like something venomous sliding toward me. I bent to pick it up, still wearing the neon vest from my night shift at the distribution center, still smelling like cardboard dust and coffee burned 2 hours too long. It said vacate in 72 hours in a font so clean it felt cruel. My blood ran cold, not metaphorically, like winter had crept into my chest, dipped its fingers into my ribs, and turned my heart into a block of ice. Lila, 7 years old and newly fearless, was building a city of markers and cereal boxes on the carpet. Jonah, 3, was lining up his toy cars by color, whispering, "Blue, blue, blue," as if he could summon safety with repetition. I tucked the paper into my vest pocket as if hiding it would shrink the danger. It didn't. I called the landlord from the hallway, where the wallpaper peeled in strips like old bandages. He didn't pick up. I went back inside, fumbled my phone with hands gone slick, and dialed again. Still no answer. I texted him. There must be a mistake. I wrote it like a prayer. Then I called the number on the notice, a law office with a voice menu that sounded like it had been trained to ignore panic. The receptionist said, "It's for non-payment." I said, "I paid." She said, "Not in full." I told her about the $20 shortfall last month when my hours got cut, and the car ate a belt I couldn't afford. Silence. Then she said, "You have 72 hours. My heart detonated quietly. No smoke, no fire, just a hush that filled my ears with the sound of my own breath. "Mom?" Lila's voice stretched thin, like she knew the secret I was trying to hide in my pocket. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," I said, and I hated myself for the lie, because I had promised after their father left that I would tell the truth, even when the truth was sharp. But the truth can be a weapon, and I was bleeding already. I told them we were going on a sleepover adventure. I don't know why I said it. Maybe because saying eviction out loud might make the floor cave in. Maybe because if I made it sound like an adventure, I could hold their fear in the palm of my hand and blow it away like a dandelion head. The trick of motherhood is learning to smile while you calculate disasters. The neighbor across the hall, Ada, cracked her door and asked if I was okay. She had a face that carried other people's stories, creases at the corners of her eyes from listening too hard. I showed her the paper. She said, "They've been doing that. Push people out. Flip the building. Put in steel appliances and Instagram plants." Her voice was a whisper, like the hallway itself might be wired. "Talk to Harbor House," she added. "They know things." She scrawled a number on the back of a grocery receipt and slid it into my hand with theater. "And keep everything. Texts, receipts, every word he says. Write it down." I packed while the kids chose stuffed animals with a seriousness that made my throat ache. I don't own much, and still it felt like deciding which parts of my life deserved to be saved. The photo of us at the lake last summer, the blanket my grandmother crocheted in colors so bright they argued with each other, Lila's cardboard skyline, Jonah's pebbles in a jar. The car was already sulking, check engine light blinking like Morse code, but it carried us to the lakeshore anyway, to a parking lot where you could see Erie fold itself into dark blue fists. I told the kids to pretend the back seat was a fort. They pretended easily, like children do, as if the world could be rearranged by imagination alone. At 3 a.m., a cruiser rolled by and paused, its headlights washing over us like a spotlight. I sat up, my chest tight, waiting to be told to move along. The officer didn't get out. Maybe he saw the booster seat and the dinosaur blanket and decided mercy was less paperwork than cruelty. When he drove away, I let the tears come, but only a few, because crying is a luxury when you need to keep your eyes clear for the next hard thing. I told myself, 72 hours is a long time when you break it into survival tasks. Call Harbor House, beg the landlord, find a friend of a friend with a couch. But the lake wind sliced through the car, and Jonah coughed, and Lila pulled the blanket up to her nose and stared at me like I was the only map she had. A thought crashed through me. What if I fail them? It hit like a wave and left me soaked. By sunrise, the paper in my pocket felt heavier than metal. I wanted to burn it, to feed it to the lake and watch the ink dissolve. Instead, I opened my phone and scrolled the comments on a mom's forum I lurk on when I can't sleep. "Anyone know emergency housing in Erie? Single mom, 2 kids." I typed it, deleted it, typed again. Posting meant admitting. Admitting meant swallowing pride so big it lodged in my throat like a stone. I hit send. And then, without warning, A tiny thing shifted inside me. Not hope, something sturdier, a decision. If the world was going to push us out, I would push back harder. I didn't know how yet. I only knew I'd fight until my knuckles bled. I checked the time. 7:02 a.m., 70 hours left, and the day already felt older than I was. I didn't know it then, but the eviction was only the first knock. There were other doors about to open, and not all of them led outward. Some led down. Some led straight into secrets I had walked past every day without seeing. I told the kids we were getting pancakes, cheap ones, because there's a math to poverty that only people doing it understand. And I started the engine. It coughed, stuttered, then caught like a reluctant promise. We drove toward a day that would tear things down and build stranger things in their place. The worst was not the paper. The worst was not the car. The worst wore polite smiles and expensive shoes. The worst was yet to come. My name is Maya Ruiz. I am 32 years old, a single mother of 2 brilliant, complicated children, and until last week I lived on the second floor of a brick building that used to be a glove factory, back when Erie stitched leather tight around American hands. If you're watching this, I want you to know 2 things right away. First, that survival has a taste. Metallic, like a coin you keep turning on your tongue. And second, that telling this story is not a performance. It's a flare fired into the sky so someone else in a dark car will see light and think, maybe morning is possible. Before the paper slid through my door like a blade, life wasn't easy, but it was measured. I worked nights scanning packages in a warehouse with a ceiling so high it felt like weather could happen in there. On weekends, I mopped floors at a medical clinic where the lights never turned fully off, like the building itself was afraid of the dark. I slept in slices, took showers that were more strategy than refreshment, and counted dollars the way other people count steps. My calendar was a game of Tetris, childcare, shifts, school drop-offs, blocks falling too fast, my job to keep them from stacking to the top. The landlord, Mr. Halverson, had a smile like a receipt, long and narrow and filled with items I couldn't afford. He raised the rent in May, and again in August. He said it was market correction, as if markets were weather that just happened, not choices made in rooms people like me never see. The ceiling leaked in the kitchen, staining the plaster like a slow bruise. The heat clanked like it resented us. When I texted videos of the leak, he replied with thumbs-up emojis and promises that evaporated faster than bleach. If this is the first time you've found me, hi. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm asking for witnesses. So do me a favor. Subscribe if you want more of this raw, unedited truth, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. It matters. Not because numbers save me, but because each ping is proof that my voice traveled farther than the hallway where Ada whispered warnings and the lakefront parking lot where my children learned the shape of fear. Tell me if you've ever had to fold your life into a trunk and pretend it's an adventure. Tell me if your blood has ever gone cold just from reading a font. Back to the morning of the notice. I drove to Harbor House, the community center Ada had mentioned, with the car making a noise like a fork in a blender. Inside, a woman named Patrice with braids that swung like punctuation marks handed me a pamphlet and a cup of coffee hot enough to wake everything. Harbor House smelled like crayons and industrial soap, and somewhere down the hall a baby laughed, which felt like a tiny insurrection against the universe. We see this every week, Patrice said, her voice lined with both fatigue and fury. Renovictions. They slap on subway tile an open concept, and suddenly a studio costs the same as a family's entire grocery budget. She gave me a list. Legal aid, shelters, churches that might offer gas cards. Then she leaned in and lowered her voice. Document everything. If he changes the locks before the court order, it's illegal. If he shuts off utilities, it's harassment. Record calls. Screenshot texts. We call it building a wall of truth. I nodded and felt a thing loosen inside me. I had always thought of truth as a soft instrument, something you sang or carried carefully. But Patrice made it a brick. Build with it, her eyes said. Throw it if you have to. I called legal aid and left my story on a voicemail that promised a return call within 3 to 5 business days. 3 to 5 business days is a year when you have children and a car full of everything you own. I called a shelter and learned about wait lists. I called churches and learned that generosity has business hours. I learned again that this world operates by rules written by people who assumed their emergencies would come with warning. At the diner, where I sometimes picked up breakfast shifts, Sal the cook slid a plate of pancakes onto the pass with a wink and said, "On me." He's one of those men the world underrates until the fire alarm goes off, and he's the one holding the door. Lila ate like she was starved for sweetness, and Jonah used a fork, like it was a new species he had to study. I tried to breathe in the normal: coffee steam, the tang of orange slices, the scrape of knife on toast. But normal had already shifted. Everything I did for the rest of that day was underlined by a sentence I couldn't stop reading. "You have 72 hours. I took the kids to school because I wanted at least half their day to feel ordinary." Mrs. Klein, Lila's teacher, noticed the bags in the back seat and the way I avoided her eyes. She pressed a note into my hand that said, "If you need anything, call." Underneath a phone number, she had drawn a tiny lighthouse. I put it in my pocket with the eviction notice, side by side, like I was carrying both the problem and the promise at once. Tiny lighthouses matter more than anyone admits. Around noon, I drove back to the apartment to grab a few more things. The key turned, then jammed. The lock resisted like a muscle clenched on purpose. My scalp prickled. I knocked. Nothing. I texted the landlord. "Did you change the lock?" No response. I called him and let it ring until the call died of boredom. I pressed my ear to the door as if the apartment could talk, as if the city we had built out of cereal boxes and courage might whisper back a plan. The hallway smelled different. Fresh paint, like they were erasing us in coats. My blood cooled again. He's moving fast, I thought. Faster than the law. Faster than my fear. I did what Patrice said. I recorded a video of myself jiggling the key in the lock, the camera catching the trembling of my hand. I said the date and time into the phone. I texted the video to Ada, and to a number Harbor House had given me for a tenant's hotline. The text bubbles blinked like heart monitors. For a second, I believed the blinking would hold us alive. I believed plenty of things that day, because belief is a muscle you have to use when the floor shifts. If you're still with me, don't forget, subscribe, and tell me where you're watching from. Not because I'm chasing likes, but because I'm building a map. I want to know where the lighthouses are. I want to see if your city is painting over people like mine is. Share your city, your story, your survival trick, how you heat soup with a curling iron, how you turn a parking lot into a campsite, how you teach a child to be brave without teaching them to be numb. The algorithms won't save us, but the chorus might. In the car outside the building that used to be our home, I watched the clouds thicken like someone dimming the day with a dial. The storm wasn't scheduled, but storms don't RSVP. I checked the time. 54 hours left. The math was wrong anyway. A landlord with enough audacity can make time bleed. I tucked the lighthouse note deeper into my pocket, turned the key, and planned to drive to the clinic to mop floors until the thoughts inside my skull quieted down. But halfway there, my phone buzzed with an unknown number. I answered, and a voice I didn't recognize said, very calmly, "Ms. Ruiz, you don't know me, but you need to see something. Don't go to work. Come to 314 State Street. Blue door." The call cut. No name, no explanation. I stared at the gray sky and felt a new sensation. Not fear, not hope. Foreshadow, like the world had leaned in to whisper a secret it wasn't sure I deserved. I didn't know it then, but the blue door would open into a story none of us were meant to hear, and once I heard it, there was no unhearing it. The worst was yet to come. The blue door at 314 State Street was the kind of door you don't notice until someone tells you to. It had a smudge of yellow near the knob like it had once been brighter, and then thought better of it. I knocked the way poor people knock, like sound itself might charge a fee. The door opened a crack, then wider, then wide enough to admit me and my confusion. Inside, the lighting was the soft kind used in places where people tell the truth for the first time. A woman with a tight bun and glasses pushed up onto her head introduced herself as Claire. She wore a cardigan that made you trust her until you realized it was armor. "You don't know me," she said, "but I know your landlord." She slid a folder across a table like a dealer laying down a hand that could change a game. "Blue Basin Development," she said. The name fell heavy. "They're buying your building. In cash. Closing in 2 weeks. They need it vacant to meet their lender's covenants." "How do you know this?" I asked, because every survival story sooner or later requires a leap of faith, and I had to check if the ground was fake. "I'm a paralegal," she said. Or I was, until I started asking questions. Turns out my curiosity had an expiration date. She smiled without mirth. "Point is, they're pushing illegal lockouts to speed the timeline. You're not the first. Won't be the last." The folder contained copies of emails, a chain between my landlord and someone at Blue Basin, full of words like deliver vacant and optics and streamlined transition. My fingers trembled on the pages. The corporate voice is a language, and it says the same thing over and over. We will have what we want. There were notes from a private security firm about soft intimidation strategies. There were inspection reports that had been signed on days no inspector had visited our building. I felt like I was looking at a magic trick in reverse, where the rabbit climbs back into the hat and you see the trap door already open. Claire slid me a prepaid phone. Use this to record. Don't use your own. Assume everything you do is being watched. She looked at me like she was measuring whether I would break. There's more, she said, and my stomach dropped like an elevator that forgot about gravity. The city council is voting next week on a tax abatement for Blue Basin. Your building is part of their revitalization corridor. The vote is public. The committee chair is a man named Dalton Reese. She pointed to a picture clipped from a newspaper. Hair too perfect, smile too polished. I recognized him from a billboard that promised growth for Erie. He looked like a man who would sell you your own house and then congratulate you on the deal. How does this help me? I asked. Because you can map the conspiracy only so far before you need a key you can actually turn. Claire nodded. Leverage. If you can slow them down, noise, press, legal complaints, they might pay you to vacate quietly. Cash for keys. Or the city could delay the abatement. Either one buys you time. Time buys you choices. I left the blue door with the folder like a bomb in my bag, and the prepaid phone warm in my pocket. I picked up the kids from school and said nothing, because what would I say? That we were pawns in a game played by people who call greed a racket of revitalization, that across town, men in suits were deciding what our kitchen was worth to them, that the lock that wouldn't turn was not a malfunction but a message. At dinner, I made boxed mac and cheese and added peas so I could call it green. Lila told me a story about a girl in her class who had once lived in a hotel because her house caught fire. She said it was scary, but also kind of like a vacation, Lila said, eyes bright with the relief of not being the girl in the story. I chewed and remembered the officer's headlights slicing our back seat in two. I said, sometimes scary comes with a view. That doesn't make it a vacation. She nodded like she understood more than I wanted her to. That night, a text arrived from an unknown number. Cash for keys. $1,000 if you're out by Friday. No press, no trouble. A link followed to a generic agreement. It wasn't from the landlord. It was from someone at Blue Basin with a title that meant nothing and everything. Transitions manager. $1,000 was more money than I had seen in one place since the stimulus checks, and even then it had gone poof. Rent, tires, groceries that disappear in a week. But $1,000 wouldn't cover first and last month's rent anywhere. It wouldn't even guarantee the car would keep being a car. And the phrase, no press, no trouble, made my blood heat in a way that felt constructive. They wanted silence. Silence is valuable. If I had something they valued, I wasn't powerless. I texted back, $5,000 and you fix the lock today so I can get my kids winter coats and asthma meds. I pressed send and waited for the world to say no. While I waited, I called the tenant's hotline. A woman named Sandra answered on the second ring like she had been expecting me. File a police report for illegal lockout, she said. Even if they don't take it seriously, the paper matters. Then file a complaint with code enforcement. Then call the local paper. They're yawning, but they still wake up sometimes. She paused. And don't sign anything without a lawyer looking at it. The next day, I went to the precinct with Lila and Jonah because childcare is a puzzle I solve daily with duct tape and caffeine. The officer behind the glass listened like he was playing a game on his phone in his head. It's a civil matter, he said. I showed him the video of the lock. I used words Sandra had given me. Illegal lockout, retaliation, habitability. He shrugged. We don't get involved unless there's a court order. He handed me a form anyway, and I filled it out with neat capitals, like neatness could make it real. When we left, Lila whispered, "Did the police help?" I said, "They gave us a form." She nodded, trying to decide whether that counted as help. I didn't tell her that sometimes paper is a weapon, and sometimes it's a wall, and sometimes it's a paper blade sliding under your door. At code enforcement, a man with a mustache that looked like it was born tired took my complaint and stamped it with a sound that felt satisfying for exactly 1 second. Could take weeks, he said. You know how it is. I wanted to say, actually, I don't know anything anymore, but I just thanked him and left. Outside, the wind off the lake found the holes in my thrift store coat with surgical precision. I pulled Jonah close and breathed the smell of his hair like medicine. The prepaid phone rang. A man's voice. 2,000. Lock fixed by the morning. He sounded bored, like he was ordering lunch. I said, 4,000. Lock fixed by tonight. And you confirm in writing you'll reimburse me for a motel until the court date. Silence like a room inhaling. Then, 3,000. Lock tonight. Motel 2 nights. I opened my mouth to accept, then thought of Patrice's eyes going flint hard. Build with the truth, she had said. Throw it if you have to. 3,500, I said. And the lock in an hour. Or I go to the paper right now with your emails. I know about the tax abatement. The silence changed. He knew I wasn't guessing anymore. Fine, he said, and hung up. A text arrived with a confirmation and a location to pick up the money. A bland office with a fake plant and a receptionist who slid an envelope across a desk without meeting my eyes. The envelope was fatter than I expected and lighter than I wanted. Money has a smell. They never mention that. It smells like paper and possibility, and a little like betrayal. I drove back to the building. The locks had been changed back, as promised. The apartment looked smaller than I remembered, like a room shrinks when you know you're about to say goodbye. We packed in a fury that felt like triumph and funeral all at once. Lila hugged the doorframe. Jonah kissed the refrigerator because he kisses everything. I texted Ada. We're okay for now. She replied, not yet. Come by. I have something. In her apartment, Ada closed the curtains and pressed play on a recording. It was my landlord's voice, smooth and reptilian, telling a contractor to start demo on 2. Don't worry if her stuff's still there. We'll box it up and put it on the curb. My spine went electric. How did you get this? I asked. Ada looked at me over her glasses. You're not the only one who can build a wall of truth, she said. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, also, I'm not just your neighbor. I'm a reporter. The word detonated, exploded, rearranged the scene. Suddenly the cardigan, the careful questions, the notes taped to her door, they all clicked into place. We're doing a series on revitalization, she said, making air quotes that sliced the air. Your story could be the spine. I wanted to say yes on the spot, to fling open the window and shout the truth into the street. But my children. Stories have splash zones, and I needed to know where the water would land. If I talk, I said, will it help or hurt? Ada didn't blink. Both, she said. At first it will hurt. Then it could help more people than you know. But we do this only if you want to, and only if we can keep your kids' faces out of it. That night, we checked into a motel with a sign that buzzed. The sheets were thin but clean, and the heater made a sound like a friendly dragon sleeping. I lay between my kids in the dark and watched the neon light leak through the curtains. My phone buzzed with messages from strangers who had seen my post on the Moms Forum and wanted to help. A woman in Ohio offering an air mattress, a guy in Buffalo offering a day's work painting, a grandmother in Pittsburgh sending a grocery card code, tiny lighthouses. I cried quietly into the motel pillow, and the salt burned my lips, and I promised the room and the night and myself, I will not let this swallow us. In the morning, Ada texted, council hearing today, 2 p.m. If you want to speak, I can put you on the list. I thought of the envelope in my bag, and the motel receipt in my wallet, and the way my children slept like animals that trust the forest. I texted back, put me on. Then I made a sandwich from motel breakfast bread and peanut butter, and slid half to Lila and half to Jonah, and my hands were steady, even though inside me everything was shaking. I didn't know it yet, but the hearing would not be the climax. It would only be the first drum. The storm was still building its muscle. The worst was yet to come. City Hall looked like a set for a show where justice always arrives by the end of the episode. Marble, columns, a mural of robed figures gazing down with the confidence of people who never had to text a stranger for a motel code. The council chamber smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and old paper, cameras on tripods, men in suits, a row of developers with polished shoes gleaming like they had fed on the night. I signed my name on a clipboard, public comment, and my hand didn't shake this time. Ada stood near the back, eyes on everything at once. She nodded to me. You can do this. Patrice from Harbor House arrived and squeezed my shoulder. I brought friends, she whispered, and the door opened to a stream of mothers and grandmothers and kids with glitter on their cheeks from school art. People the city forgets until we crowd its rooms and make forgetting impossible. The chair called the meeting to order. Dalton Reese, billboard smile, touched the microphone like it was an old friend. They started with a slideshow, renderings of the revitalization corridor, wide sidewalks, string lights, plants in square boxes that never wilt. The buildings were drawn in the shade of aspiration named warm gray. The people in the slides were young, white, thin, and always laughing. The developers spoke in sentences that had been ironed 20 times. Public comment opened. A man with a baritone voice said he owned a hardware store and welcomed new energy. A woman in a crisp blazer praised the tax base. Then Patrice stepped up and let the room know what it felt like to climb 3 flights with groceries and asthma. She said renoviction like it was a verdict. The room shifted. You could feel it. The discomfort that comes when you realize the story you came to tell about yourself is incomplete. Then they called my name. I stood. The room felt like it had too much air, and I pictured the motel bed and the blue door and the paper blade on my floor. My name is Maya Ruiz, I said, and my voice surprised me by being my voice. I am a single mother of 2. I worked last night loading boxes so people like you can get packages same day. Yesterday, my landlord changed my lock without a court order. I have it on video. He is selling our building to the developers you are about to reward with a tax break. They offered me cash to leave and keep quiet. A ripple in the room, eyes sliding sideways, the developers' faces doing math. I am not quiet, I said. I will not be. I told them about Lila's cardboard city and Jonah's pebbles and the way the hallway smelled like paint the day they erased us. I told them about the envelope with money that felt like both lifeline and noose. I said illegal and harassment and children and winter, and watched those words land on the polished wood like stones. Then I pulled the prepaid phone from my pocket and pressed play on Ada's recording. My landlord's voice filled the chamber. Start demo on 2. Don't worry if her stuff's still there. It was not dramatic in sound, but it was devastating in fact. The sentence landed, and the room changed. The muraled, robed figures looked less confident. Or maybe that was my imagination rising like a fever. Ms. Ruiz, the chair said, voice calm like ice. This is not the proper venue for... I cut in. And I am not sorry. If not here, where? If not now, when? You are about to give public money to a private company that breaks the law to speed profit. You call it revitalization. For whom? I felt a crack open inside my chest. Not a breaking, a hatching. Something was being born. The version of me that doesn't ask permission to defend her children's lives. Ada moved, subtle as a second hand on a clock, and I noticed her camera was recording. So were others. Phones raised like a field of small lighthouses. I imagined their tiny beams reaching living rooms where someone like me would sit up straighter and think, say it, say it, say it. A council member with a kind face cleared his throat. Mr. Reese, he said, turning to the chair, perhaps we should table the vote until we can investigate these allegations. The chair's smile thinned. Allegations, he repeated, taste-testing the word like it might poison him. Then something exploded. Not a bomb. A revelation. A man at the back, short and sweating, stood up and shouted, "This is a setup! She's lying! We have never..." He stumbled over never and ever, like his tongue forgot which lie it preferred. I knew that face. It took me a second to place him, the law office receptionist. But he wasn't a receptionist. The laminate on his badge read, Blue Basin, Transitions Manager. The room turned its head like a single body. Dalton Reese hissed something that the microphone didn't catch. The manager dropped back into his seat like someone had cut his strings. The chair banged his gavel. "Order," he demanded, and the demand sounded smaller than the gavel. "We will take a 5-minute recess." They rose like a flock and left in a huddle. The developers tucked into their center like a secret. The rest of us stayed, buzzing, the air alive with electricity and breath, and the knowledge that when truth explodes, it leaves shrapnel that changes the battlefield. In the hallway, Ada's face was lit with focus. "You did it," she said. "You punctured the script." My knees suddenly remembered the weight of me, and I leaned against the cool marble to keep from going boneless. "Does it matter?" I asked, voice cracking now that the adrenaline had stopped paying attention. "Will it actually matter?" Ada didn't give me comfort she couldn't guarantee. She gave me the next step. "Yes, because we're not done," she said. "We published tonight. We've got receipts. We've got your tape. If they try anything, it will be in the first paragraph." The council reconvened with faces arranged like furniture after a storm. You could tell things had been moved, even if you couldn't say exactly where. The motion to table passed by one vote. One vote. The room exhaled like it had been holding its lungs hostage. Patrice hugged me so tight my bones hummed. We spilled onto the steps like light. People clapped me on the shoulder, congratulated Ada, shook Patrice's hand. I should have been buoyed, but the sky had turned the color of a bruise, and my stomach was a fist. I had made noise, and noise can wake up monsters. I walked the kids to the bus stop near the motel and kissed their cheeks with the zeal of a saint worshipping relics. Back in the room, I locked the door, wedged a chair under the knob because fear turns you into an engineer, and tried to breathe. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. You made a mistake. Then a second later, it would be a shame if Child Protective Services knew your kids were sleeping in a motel. The world went white. Snow white. Hospital white. The kind of white that erases outlines. My blood didn't run cold. It froze. Solid. Now they were playing the dirtiest card. I called Ada. They're threatening CPS, I said, and the words came out like stones. She didn't soothe. She strategized. Call me back on the prepaid. I'm coming over. Don't open the door for anyone. The line went dead and returned as the prepaid buzzed. Listen, Ada said, voice like a map. We'll get ahead of it. We call CPS ourselves. We tell them everything. We show them the motel receipt, the cash for keys agreement, the police report. We make it impossible for Blue Basin to weaponize the lie. My whole body wanted to hide, but hiding is a luxury that leaks. Okay, I said, and even the word okay felt like a victory. I called CPS. I told the truth like a person on a cliff calling out to a person on another cliff. Loud, clear, and hoping the canyon doesn't eat the sound. The intake worker's voice was gentler than I expected. She asked questions that didn't feel like traps. Are the children with you right now? Yes. Do they have food? Yes. Are they safe? Yes, I said. And then I said it again. Not as information, but as invocation. That night, the heat in the motel died with a last gasp and refused to resurrect. The front desk gave me a space heater that looked like a toaster. The storm that had been brewing all day arrived like it held a grudge. The wind hit the window in fists. I layered the kids in 3 shirts each and told them it was a funny pajama party. We huddled under the crocheted blanket that smelled like my grandmother, and I told them a story about a fox who outsmarted a wolf by remembering which path led home. Lila listened with serious eyes. Jonah fell asleep with his fingers curled around my hair. The space heater hummed a lullaby written in necessity. Sound obliterates thought. I sat up so fast the room lurched. The hallway filled with bodies. Dazed, angry, shivering bodies bundling children and dogs and dignity. The night manager banged on doors, shouting, "Stay outside until the truck gives the all clear." Snow sharpened the air into knives. The fire truck arrived with its red certainty, and we stood in a trembling huddle while strangers became a temporary tribe. A firefighter went in. Smoke trickled from a vent and dissipated like it had remembered a different appointment. False alarm. The all clear came, thin but real. We filed back in, smaller, colder, more aware of how quickly walls can stop being walls. At the door to our room, I hesitated. Someone had slipped something beneath it. A crisp white envelope with no return address. My name on the front. I opened it with hands that knew better. Inside, a photo of my kids at the diner, taken from outside through the glass. On the back, 2 words in block letters. Time's up. My heart didn't explode. It detonated silently and reassembled into a weapon. They had crossed a line that good people pretend doesn't exist. This was not pressure. This was terror. Ada arrived 6 minutes later, cheeks raw from the wind, eyes fox-sharp. I handed her the photo. She didn't gasp. She went still. "They escalated," she said. "So do we." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling the editor. We publish everything. Tonight. We name names. We include the threats. And we call the detective I know who hates bullies." The kids slept. Small crescent moons on thin mattresses. I watched their chests rise and fall, and understood that whatever line I feared crossing had already been crossed by someone who thought we were movable scenery. No more. I gave Ada the folder from the blue door, the texts, the audio, the envelope. I signed the consent form she handed me. My name a signature of war. She squeezed my hand. "This will get worse before it gets better," she said. I nodded. "I know," I said. And this time the sentence didn't feel like despair. It felt like preparation. At 3:14 a.m., the story went live. The headline called what was happening by its true name. Eviction by Design. How Erie's revitalization targets single mothers. My face wasn't in it. My children's names weren't in it. But my voice filled the paragraphs like floodwater. There were screenshots, audio, emails, a photo of the lock, quotes from Harbor House, quotes from the hardware store owner who had spoken so warmly about new energy and who, to his credit, revised his position when faced with the facts. The comments turned into a bonfire, some trying to pour water, some trying to pour gasoline. I didn't read them. Ada told me not to. "Our job is the story," she said, "not the storm it makes." At 6:07 a.m., the motel manager knocked. He brought hot chocolate like he knew what the night had been. "Someone called and paid for 3 more nights," he said. "Said to tell you stay warm and keep talking." I didn't ask who. Acts of kindness do not always require interrogation. I closed the door and let the steam fog my eyes. The worst had come and bared its teeth, but we were still here. We were still talking. And the day had other plans. Plans I couldn't see yet. Plans that would cut and then heal in places I didn't know existed. Because the night was long, but it wasn't endless. Because the monsters hate light. Because the worst, believe me, was still not done with us. The worst was yet to come. Morning brought consequences like a tide bringing debris, and also nourishment. The city announced an investigation. Code enforcement issued violations to my landlord that read like a new language. Fines, deadlines, the kinds of words that make men in suits adjust their collars. The police detective Ada had called, left a message saying he wanted to chat, which is cop for we're looking. Harbor House set up a fund for tenants displaced by revitalization, and by noon it had enough zeros to buy time for 5 families. My prepaid phone pinged with texts from strangers offering secondhand furniture, a job interview at a place that paid $1 more than I made now, and a spare bedroom from a widow who missed the noise of small feet. And then, a shock that landed like a twist in a story I thought I understood. An email from a woman named Elise Halverson. The last name cut me. The landlord's daughter. She wrote, "I did not know. I've been living in Pittsburgh. I saw the article. My father is not the man I thought he was. I can help." The words felt like a trap and a lifeline braided together. I met her in a coffee shop where the music was too loud to eavesdrop and too soft to annoy. She was younger than me, with a grief in her eyes that seemed older. "I'm sorry," she said before she sat. "I know sorry doesn't fix heat or give back nights of sleep, but I have access." She slid a thumb drive across the table. Accounting, emails, contracts. Enough to make investigation mean something. "Why are you doing this?" I asked. "Because it matters. Because I believed my father when he said he was helping the city," she said, voice a raw wire. "Because good men can do bad things when they decide other people are inventory. Because I can't unknow. And because I read about your kids." Her voice faltered. "I was a latchkey kid. I know the way fear tastes." We gave Ada the drive. The second article blew open the first like a door kicked off its hinges. The council called a special session. The vote flipped from table to no. Blue Basin's tax abatement died on the floor. Not with dignity, but with a groan. The developers released a statement full of adjectives that begged forgiveness. My landlord's lawyer tried to paint me as a disgruntled tenant with a history of non-payment. Ada published the receipts, rent logs, bank transfers, dates and amounts, the single $20 shortfall that had turned into a storm. If the truth is a wall, the receipts were the mortar. But the story wasn't just about stopping one deal. It was about the space that opened when a machine stuttered. Patrice convened a tenants' union in the Harbor House basement. We sat in metal chairs under fluorescent lights and said our names and our rents and our stories. A man who had never cried in public wept over a dog he couldn't keep if he moved. A grandmother with hands like history said she had seen this before by another name. We wrote down strategies on butcher paper with thick markers, and for the first time in a long time, the sound in the room wasn't complaint. It was construction. As for me and the kids, we landed in a 2-bedroom run by a community land trust that capped rents at what people could actually pay. The walls were off-white and clean in a way that felt like a chance. Lila arranged her markers on a shelf by Spectrum and rebuilt her skyline, taller this time. Jonah lined up his cars on the windowsill and named them like saints. The first night, I lay in a bed that belonged to us, in a room where the heater hummed without menace, and I felt something crack and spill warm. Relief? Yes. Gratitude? Yes. But also a fiercer thing. Claim. We belonged somewhere not because someone had allowed it, but because we had fought and people had stood, and the truth had done its loud work. Work shifted too. The distribution center offered me more hours. Then a full-time spot with benefits after Ada's article put a halo over my name I didn't entirely deserve. I took it because stability is a kind of revolution, but I kept Tuesdays free for Harbor House, where I now teach a class called Paper Armor, how to build your wall of truth. We lay out timelines, log calls, practice what to say when a cop shrugs and a clerk stamps. I teach people to save the texts that seem too small to matter. We print the phrase cash for keys on a whiteboard and talk about when it's a trap and when it's a rope. We talk about lighthouses and how to be one, even if all you have is a phone and a steady hand. The last twist came quietly, like grace, an anonymous donation to the tenants' fund large enough to seed a legal defense pool. Only Ada and I know it came from Elise. She asked to stay unnamed. "This is not penance," she said when we met to sign the paperwork. "It's structural." I looked at her and saw not a villain's daughter, not a savior, but a person who had chosen a side and would have to keep choosing it. That's the thing about redemption. It's a verb. If you've traveled with me this far, through the motel ice and the gavel bang and the envelope under the door, I'm asking two small, enormous things. First, subscribe. Not because I want to monetize my pain, but because I want to keep a channel open where stories like mine can arrive and ripple. Second, comment where you're watching from. Put your city on our map. Maybe you're in a town where string lights already hang and landlords send fruit baskets. Maybe you're in a place where the paint smells fresh in the hallway, and not because they're covering us up. Or maybe you're in a car by a lake, reading this on a phone you bought with a paycheck that wasn't enough, and your blood just went cold for reasons you can't say out loud. Drop your location. We'll draw a line from you to me, to Patrice, to Ada, to Elise, to the hardware guy, to the cop who finally did the paper right to the widow who said she missed the noise of small feet. Those lines make a net. Nets catch people. Nets break falls. Nets sometimes become trampolines. Here is the lesson I promised, the one I want tattooed inside my skull for the next time a paper blade slides under my door. They count on our silence. They count on our shame, our fatigue, the way we are trained to apologize for taking up space. Break the count. Speak. Text. Record. Knock on a blue door. Ask the question you're not supposed to. When the worst comes, and it will, because the worst is a pilgrim that never gets tired, meet it at the threshold with a wall of truth and a choir behind you. It won't vanish, but it will flinch. And sometimes, it will fall. I'll end with this. The other night, Lila asked if we could go back to the lake. We stood in the parking lot where the cruiser had paused, and the wind was softer, like the lake had nothing to prove. She held my hand and said, "Do you think the fox found the right path?" I squeezed her fingers. "He did," I said, "because the forest remembered him." She looked at me with the clean certainty children give as a gift. "We remember you, Mommy," she said. My heart exploded, not with fear, not with anger, but with a bright quiet that felt like sunrise. Subscribe. Tell me where you are. And if your blood is cold right now, borrow my heat. I've got enough for both of us. Because the worst came, and we are still here, and the truth doesn't get tired if you feed it. And if anything tries to push you out, remember, we have learned how to push back. We have learned how to make noise that turns into music. We have learned that there is always another door, often blue, usually unmarked, that leads not out, but through. Now tell me where you're watching from, so we can aim the lighthouses your way, and so that when the next paper hisses under a door, the room it slides into is already bright.